The Forbidden City was a place where one wrong move could kill you. For 500 years, it wasn't just a palace. It was a world governed by rules. Every detail was a rule, a strict rule, and by looking at it, you can see the social machinery. The exact machinery that held an empire together from inside its walls. How did it control everything? The color of a robe, the direction of a walk. What did it cost to live there in that kind of perfection? We're going to look at 20 decrees. Some of the most severe ones, they shaped existence. For the emperor, for the lowest servant. This shows how power sustains itself, not through grand gestures, but through the management of daily life, the relentless management of it, and it makes you wonder, does absolute control create order, or does it just build a cage, a more beautiful cage? The Forbidden City's walls weren't about keeping people out, they were about drawing a line. A line between the ordinary world and something else, a place of cosmic order. It was built in the early 15th century by the emperor, and it wasn't just a palace, it was a statement. A declaration in wood and stone that the emperor's power came from the heavens. That idea, the mandate of heaven, it needed a home. So the Forbidden City became that home, an architectural diagram of power. Everything in it meant something. The outer courts, where officials gathered for ceremonies, that was the emperor's public face. The inner courts, where the imperial family lived, that was the dynasty's heart. The layout created a hierarchy, a silent rule. To move inward was to rise in importance. To be allowed deeper inside was a sign of favor. The whole place became a stage, a continuous performance. Everyone inside had a role. A minister in silks, a eunuch sweeping a corridor, they were pieces on a celestial board. Their movements, their presence, it was all part of a ritual that affirmed the world's order. That context matters, the sacred isolation. It explains why the rules here weren't just practical, they were liturgical. They were about maintaining the perfection of the performance, preserving the illusion of a heaven-ordained system where every detail was correct. The palace was a theater of controlled existence, and the script for that theater was 20,000 regulations. To step outside your role wasn't just breaking a rule. It was disrupting the cosmic harmony the entire city was built to embody. The roof color was a decree. In the Forbidden City, only one person could have a roof of brilliant yellow glazed tiles. That was the emperor, and this wasn't just a preference. It was the first law, the most unbreakable one, written not on paper but in the clay and stone of the palace. The whole city was a physical manifesto of the mandate of heaven. Every architectural detail enforced the social order, silently. Relentlessly. Take the roof ridges, those sweeping lines curving upward. Along them, a line of small ceramic figures, mythical beasts, the immortal Xian Ren, the dragon-faced Kai Wen. The number was never random. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, the throne hall, had 10 of these guardians. No other building in the empire was allowed that many. It was a visual code. A minister approaching would see that line of statues, and he would understand in his body the gap between his station and the Son of Heavens. Even the ground you walked on, it reinforced the hierarchy. The emperor's most important halls sat on towering, three-tiered marble terraces. To approach the throne, you had to climb. Your body physically enacted a ritual, ascent and submission. The height of these platforms was precisely regulated, a forbidden elevation for any other structure, so your status was communicated with every step. A servant in a tiled courtyard, a concubine in a garden with green roof accents, the emperor under his ocean of imperial yellow. Each person existed in a different layer of a constructed universe. It created a landscape of absolute power. Just moving from an outer court to an inner one was a lesson in your place in the cosmic order. The architecture left no room for doubt. It whispered the rules in the glaze of a tile. It shouted them from the height of a staircase, carved them into the silhouette of the skyline. This was control so complete it had become the environment itself. And if the very walls taught you your place, what freedom was left for the people who lived within them? The Forbidden City was built along a single line, a central axis running north to south. This wasn't just a design. It was thought to be the central meridian of the world, the empire's cosmic spine, and only one person could walk its true heart. That was the emperor. The main gate, the Meridian Gate, had 5 archways. The huge central passage was for the emperor alone. He used it only 3 times in his reign, for his wedding procession, for the final exams of the top scholars, and for military ceremonies after a great victory. Every other day, that center tunnel stayed empty, a silent void, a reminder of a presence that was always there, even in its absence. Everyone else had to take detours. A prince, a top minister, even the Empress Dowager. They all used the smaller side gates. Their paths were always offset, never central. To walk directly on the axis was to claim the emperor's divine connection. It was an unthinkable rebellion, performed just by putting one foot in front of the other. This control went further. It extended to your gate. The pace of life there wasn't your own. Running or even walking fast was forbidden. It was seen as undignified, panicked. A disruption of the serene, eternal order of the palace was meant to show. What was required was a slow, measured glide, a formal shuffle where the hem of a robe would barely move. Movement became a meditation on constraint. Imagine the scene. 1,000 people in the courtyards, officials in robes, eunuchs on errands, servants carrying trays, and no one ran. The only sound was the soft shuffle of silk soles on stone, a distant ritual bell. It created an eerie, controlled serenity, a silence woven from motion itself. That rule turned the body into an instrument of state. Your speed, your direction, your posture, all dictated. By controlling movement so completely, the court did more than keep order. It made the emperor's supreme authority a daily, lived experience. You felt your place with every step you took, and every step you were forbidden from taking. The architecture built the cage, but these rules of movement taught you how to live inside it. And if your walk was policed, what about the words you spoke? That silent world of controlled movement was also a world of color, a world that ran on a strict visual code. And the most powerful rule you could see was the Law of Imperial Yellow. This bright, sun-like color wasn't a choice, it was a command. By decree, it was for the emperor alone, his immediate family, and the roofs of the most sacred halls. To wear it without permission wasn't a mistake, it was treason. A visual claim to power that came only from heaven, and that created an instant hierarchy in any gathering. In a courtyard full of 1,000 officials in dark blue or crimson robes, a single flash of that yellow would cut through like a beam of light. It identified the Son of Heaven. He was the singular sun, and all others were planets, reflecting his authority in their own subordinate colors. Even within the imperial household, color dictated rank. The empress and the highest consorts might wear vibrant red or adorned gold, but never the emperor's pure yellow. Lower-ranking concubines were given colors like blue or green. Their status was woven right into the fabric of their gowns. A woman's place in the complex web of the inner court, you could understand it at a glance, by the color she was allowed to wear. It was a silent language, spoken in silks and dyes, and this color dictatorship had a profound purpose. It made the emperor's divine authority a constant, visible presence. He was the center, the source of all light and order. The exclusive use of yellow reinforced that cosmic role every single day. It reminded everyone, from the highest minister to the lowest servant, that they lived in a reflected glow. Their world was lit by a light that wasn't their own. But then, what happened when the sun set? When the yellow robes were put away and the forbidden city was plunged into darkness. Another set of rules took over, governing a realm where sight was lost and sound became everything. The silence in the inner court wasn't just empty, it was something you felt, a thick listening quiet that acted like a rule. In the emperor's private rooms, loud noise was a violation. Unrestrained laughter, a voice that traveled too far, something dropping to the floor, these were all forbidden. They broke the sacred atmosphere, and they broke the secrecy around the emperor's life. This rule made everyone a keeper of the quiet. You walked softly. You spoke in murmurs if you spoke. You handled things carefully to avoid any sound. The place became a library of whispers. Important things were said with a look or a gesture. It was a psychological enclosure as solid as a wall. In that constant quiet, you became intensely aware of yourself. Your own breath, the rustle of your clothes, it all felt loud. You lived monitoring yourself, conditioned by the silence to feel always watched. This inner world of hushed tension was the opposite of the outer courts. Out there, sound wasn't forbidden, it was required. Specific, magnificent noises were dictated by ritual. The deep boom of a giant drum called officials to audience before dawn. The clear ring of bronze bells marked the hours and the steps of a ceremony. Orchestras played ancient, stately music for every imperial movement. This wasn't music for pleasure. It was architecture made of sound. It structured time. It action. It told everyone what was happening and what their role was. So the sonic world was split. You were either in the breathless quiet of the private realm or inside the thunderous, orchestrated grandeur of the public one. There was no in-between, no casual background hum of daily life. Moving between that profound silence and that overwhelming ceremony conditioned the mind. In the quiet, you felt the weight of the emperor's unseen gaze. In the grandeur, you felt the overwhelming power of his public ritual. Both states delivered the same message. His order was total. It governed even the sounds you could hear. Your auditory world was curated. It reminded you that in the Forbidden City you were never alone with your own thoughts. The space itself was always listening, and it was always speaking. And if the sounds around you were controlled like that, then what about the words from your own mouth to speak at all? You had to get past the gatekeepers, and that means the eunuchs. The Forbidden City was a world of women, from the empress down to the maids. To protect the imperial bloodline, there was a strict rule. No adult male other than the emperor could stay overnight in the inner court. The solution was eunuchs, men who underwent a procedure before service. They became the permanent male staff of the private quarters. They were the ultimate gatekeepers. They controlled every door, every message, every moment of access to the emperor and his family. This rule for biological control created a shadow government. Eunuchs managed the imperial household's treasury. They oversaw the kitchens, the workshops, the palace maintenance. They were the emperor's scribes, his messengers, his only confidants. Their position gave them something dangerous in a sealed world: information. They decided which petitions reached the emperor's desk. They filtered the news from outside. They whispered in the right ear or the wrong one. A powerful eunuch could break a minister's career with a single comment. So the system to eliminate one threat, illegitimate heirs, created another. A class of unelected officials with unchecked influence. They were indispensable yet despised by the scholarly bureaucrats outside. They lived in a paradox, trusted with the dynasty's innermost secrets yet at the lowest rung of the social ladder. Their power didn't come from rank or birth, it came from proximity, from standing in the right corridor, holding the right paper, hearing the right conversation. It shows the consequence of absolute control. A rule to seal the inner sanctum created a leaky vessel of intrigue. The eunuchs became masters of the backstairs, an informal network that often had more power than the formal government. They were a lesson. When you build a wall to keep one problem out, you have to ask who you're trapping inside with you, and what they'll build in the shadows you've made. Their influence was a silent force, but it was rivaled by another, more visible system, one that governed the most intimate choices of the emperor's life. The emperor's private world was built on rules. Inside the inner court, behind walls the eunuchs guarded, there was a whole separate society. The imperial harem. It wasn't a place for free affection. It was an institution meticulously ordered. Its purpose was singular: to produce a male heir, to secure the dynasty's future. And to do that, emotion was secondary. Order was everything. The system was into 8 strict ranks, a hierarchy more rigid than the army. At the top was the empress, the principal wife, the mother of the nation. Below her came the titled consorts, honored, noble, pure. Then the concubines of the lower ranks, beauty, talented, worthy, and finally the attendant ladies. Each title was more than an honorific, it was a complete life package dictated by law. Your rank decided everything. The size and location of your residence. An empress lived in her own palace within the complex. A low-ranking attendant might share a single room. Your rank dictated the number of maids assigned to you, the quality and quantity of your food delivered in tiered meal services, the fabrics of your clothing, the jewels you were permitted to wear, and most crucially, it dictated your access to the emperor. The schedule of his visits was part of the state calendar, often managed by the eunuchs. Higher rank meant more frequent opportunities. For a woman in the lower tiers, seeing the emperor even once was a rare event, a pivotal event that transformed intimacy into a political frontier. A consort's entire existence became a campaign for promotion. A kind word from the emperor, the birth of a child, especially a son, could elevate her rank. That changed her life, the future of her child, the fortunes of her entire family outside the walls. And conversely, a misstep, a rumor, falling out of favor could mean demotion. To be stripped of your rank was a social death, a plunge into obscurity and hardship. So every gesture, every conversation was a calculated move. Alliances were formed and betrayed. Secrets became currency. The harem was a silent battlefield draped in silk where the prize was survival. And legacy. The rules ensured the emperor's private life was never truly private. It was an extension of statecraft. His personal affections were secondary to the needs of the dynasty. The system was designed to prevent any one woman or her family from gaining too much influence. It distributed opportunity, and by extension power across many factions. It turned the most human of relationships into a managed, bureaucratic process. Love was a potential disruption to the order. What the system valued was control, predictability, the production of an heir. In this world, a woman's heart was the last thing the rules were written to consider. Her role was defined. Her path was charted. Her value was measured by her place in a celestial bureaucracy of the bedroom. And if the inner court was governed by such a cold calculus, what did that mean for the children born into its gilded silence? Even the emperor's mourning was a public ceremony. He didn't just wake up. He performed the act of awakening, and it was a 500-year-old script. His whole existence was written down in a document, the record of daily activities. It wasn't a schedule. It was a liturgy for a single life, turning the emperor into the chief priest of his own captivity. Every action, from that first audience at dawn to his rest at night, was a ritual step, a cosmic dance meant to keep the world in harmony. Take eating. The emperor never shared a casual meal. His dining was solitary, highly orchestrated. Dozens of dishes from the imperial kitchens, each one tasted by officials first for safety. They were presented in a strict order, carried in by a silent procession of eunuchs. He would sample a few from a prescribed selection, and the rest were whisked away untouched. No family dinner table, no conversation over food. Nourishment was stripped of its social warmth, reduced to a state function. It was a reminder that even his body wasn't his own. It was an instrument of the state, to be maintained by protocol. His workday was the same: specific hours for reading memorials from ministers, a different block of time for studying the Confucian classics to reinforce his role as a sage king. Even his leisure was scheduled, time for calligraphy or walking in the garden. These weren't choices, they were obligations, performances of imperial virtue. And this ritualization had a purpose, a dual purpose. To the outside world, to the ministers who saw him, it projected an image of unwavering discipline and piety. A ruler so dedicated to tradition he'd mastered his own human desires. That legitimized his rule, made him seem less a man and more a living embodiment of celestial order. But behind the performance was a cost, a profound personal cost. This life of relentless ceremony stripped away all spontaneity, no room for a personal whim, no sudden change of plan, no private moment of unscripted reflection. His entire life was a public document, every smile, every frown interpreted as a state signal. The weight of constant performance was immense. He lived in a gilded isolation, surrounded by thousands, yet utterly alone at the center of the ritual. The system that elevated him as a demigod simultaneously imprisoned the man inside. He became the most watched and the loneliest person in the empire. His freedom was the first sacrifice the throne demanded. And if the Son of Heaven couldn't choose what to eat or when to rest, what possible autonomy was left for anyone else below him? The gates were locked at dusk. That was the 8th rule. It was absolute. Every night the forbidden city became an island. No one entered, no one left. Without the emperor's personal authorization, those huge wooden gates, reinforced with iron, they wouldn't open again until dawn. It was a security measure, sure, but it was more than that. It was a ritual of separation. It cut the imperial world off from Beijing, the city right outside the walls. During the day you had officials, servants, deliveries moving through. But at night the seal was complete. The palace turned inward, a sealed vessel in the dark. To enforce it, the military was everywhere. Guards from the elite banners patrolled the high vermilion walls in shifts. Others watched from the 4 corner towers, their silhouettes against the sky. In those towers sentries stood ready with alarm drums. The beat could mobilize the whole garrison in moments. Then there was the moat, a wide man-made river around the walls, a final barrier under the moonlight. Anyone unauthorized found inside after curfew or trying to cross that water, they faced the most severe consequences. The rule was clear. And its enforcement was meant to be terrifying. It protected the emperor's sacred body. The purity of the imperial line kept any outside threat away. But this rule, this absolute isolation, it had an unintended effect. It created an information vacuum. The walls that kept dangers out also kept reality out. The emperor and his court, in their gilded seclusion, they got news through filtered channels, memorials from ministers, reports from governors, whispers from eunuchs. These accounts could be outdated, incomplete, deliberately shaped to please or to manipulate. The true conditions, a famine in a distant province, discontent in the cities, a harsh winter. By the time they reached the inner court, they were softened. Abstract administrative problems. Cut off from the sights and sounds of the world they governed, the palace elite lived in a bubble. And in that bubble, without the steadying influence of outside facts, the internal dynamics grew distorted. Gossip about a consort's favor, speculation about the heir, rumors of a minister's ambition. That became the urgent news. Minor slights into grand conspiracies, personal rivalries festered into deep-seated plots. The sealed environment built for total control became a perfect petri dish for intrigue. The energy that couldn't flow outward turned inward, swirling in the courtyards and corridors, feeding on suspicion, on hearsay. The curfew did more than lock the gates. It locked the minds of the powerful inside a world of their own making, a world increasingly divorced from the one they were meant to rule. And in that hothouse where rumor was king, how did anyone know what was true? The emperor's table was like a fortress. There was a ninth rule, and it controlled every bite. The imperial kitchens, they were a city inside the city. A huge complex of halls and courtyards. Hundreds of chefs and bakers and butchers worked there, under a kind of military discipline. The head chef had a rank of real responsibility, real prestige, because he was guarding the emperor's most vulnerable daily act, eating. Every ingredient that came into those kitchens was a possible threat. Vegetables, grains, meats, they all arrived under strict watch. They were inspected, cleaned, prepared, all under the eyes of multiple officials. Nothing was left to chance. The fear of poisoning was a constant shadow, a ghost at the feast, so the system built a human shield. Before any dish reached the emperor, a food taster would sample it. This person, usually a trusted eunuch, performed a silent, high-stakes ritual. His well-being was the final guarantee. The meal's safety, it was a stark display. The emperor's supreme status and his deep vulnerability. His survival depended on another person's body taking the risk first. The emperor always ate alone. No shared family meal, no banquet with friends. His dining hall was a stage for a solitary performance. Dozens of dishes would be laid out in a precise symbolic arrangement, but he would only take a small taste from a few. The rest were ceremonial, a visual display of imperial abundance, of cosmic favor. After he finished, the untouched food wasn't wasted. It was carefully distributed. Gifts of immense favor to consorts, to officials, to the kitchen staff themselves. To get a dish from the emperor's table was to receive a piece of his grace. This logic of rank and control reached every corner of the inner court. The harem's meals were a precise science of privilege. A consort's daily food allowance was set by her title. An empress got a specific quota of the finest meats, the rarest teas, the most delicate pastries. A lower-ranking concubine got a much simpler, smaller portion. Her menu was a daily, edible reminder of her place, her spot in the hierarchy. Even something basic, a chicken, a basket of fruit, was a unit of status. Delivered by the eunuchs according to the bureaucratic ledger. This rule turned the act of eating into something else. It stripped food of its social warmth, its simple pleasure. For the emperor, a meal was a state function, a defensive operation, a display of solitary power. For everyone else, it was a measured dose of their own rank served on a plate. Sustenance got tangled with surveillance, with privilege, with fear. The banquet was always, quietly, a battlefield. And if the very food you ate was ruled by such intricate laws, what freedom could exist in the more private corners of life? The spaces where you slept or just tried to rest, your rank was in your clothes. There was this 10th rule about what you wore at court. It was a whole system of laws about fabric, about style. It turned clothing into a kind of language. It was more than just the emperor's yellow. Everything about what you wore, the sleeve, the hat, the embroidery, it all said something. It said who you were, and it said who you were not. This wasn't about fashion. It was like armor, a contract you wore every day. The strongest symbols were just for the emperor. The 5-clawed dragon, the long, that was his alone. You'd see it on his robes in gold thread. A mythical creature for his authority. For anyone else to wear that wasn't an accident. It was a claim, a visual claim to the throne, treason you could see from a distance. So the system had other options. A scale of creatures going down. Princes of high rank might have a 4-clawed dragon. Top officials got birds, a golden pheasant or a crane. Lower ranks got other animals, less prestigious ones. Your robe told a story about how close you were to power, written in silk. Then there were the squares, The Mandarin squares, embroidered badges on the front and back of a robe, they were like a public resume. For a civil official, the square might have a bird, something graceful for literary skill. For a military officer, a beast, a lion or a tiger for martial strength. And even then, the specific animal, the details, they showed your exact grade, your level in the bureaucracy. One look at a man's chest and you knew his standing. His value to the state made into a picture. The rules covered everything. The fur in a winter hat, the jade on a belt, how many pearls a consort could wear. During a big ceremony, the whole court was like a catalog, a living diagram of the empire's order. It was a breathtaking order, and it was a pressure, a constant psychological pressure. To get dressed was to perform a ritual, a daily submission to the system. You didn't just get dressed, you had to remember your place and then you had to wear it. A servant putting on plain, dark cotton was playing their part. A minister putting on his crane square was accepting his. There was no personal expression, no individual style. Your identity came from the state wardrobe. It was issued to you. That made any change dangerous. A robe with embroidery that was too intricate, a hat with an ornament it shouldn't have. That wasn't a mistake in fashion. It was a subversive act. It suggested ambition, discontent, a wish to be seen as something else, something other than what the system said you were. In a world of fixed roles, that was a threat. It could lead to accusations, arrogance, or worse, treason. The clothes made the man, but only because the state made the clothes. It was control woven into the fabric of life. If your outer appearance was policed that completely, then what rules governed the inside, your mind? The things you kept secret. The Kowtow was the ultimate act of loyalty. It was a physical act. This 11th rule took the idea of submission and made it a bodily discipline, a full prostration. You kneel, then bend forward to touch your forehead to the ground. In the most solemn ceremonies before the emperor on his throne, the ritual was precise. 3 separate kneelings. And during each kneeling, 3 separate head knockings, 3 kneelings, 9 prostration. This wasn't spontaneous. It was mandatory. The number was sacred. It turned the courtier's body into an instrument. To perform the Kowtow was to enact your own insignificance. Your spine bent. Your vision was limited to the floor, the cool stone against your forehead. You were physically enacting the hierarchy, making it real through strain. For an elderly minister, this was an ordeal, a test of endurance. But to perform it incorrectly, to miscount, to rise too soon, that was a grave offense. It wasn't just a breach of etiquette, it was a symbolic rebellion, a refusal to acknowledge the divine order. Such an act could end a career or a life. The ritual did something profound. It internalized power. By repeating this act year after year, the courtier didn't just show obedience, he began to feel it. The ritual carved the reality of supremacy into muscle memory, into the joints. It made abstract loyalty something you did with your body. The Forbidden City was full of these lessons: the slow walk, the bowed head, the prescribed posture. They trained the inhabitant from the inside out to inhabit their role. This physical governance extended to intimate spaces, the emperor's own bedchamber. His most private refuge was, like everything else, a stage managed by unseen rules. The emperor's bedchamber was his own stage, a solitary performance. But that seclusion, it wasn't his alone. It was a shared sentence. For the women of the imperial family, the 12th rule was a wall with no gate. Once a consort or a princess entered the Forbidden City, she almost never left. Her world, no matter how vast the palace seemed, became the size of a courtyard. This was absolute containment. Designed to protect something more valuable than any person, the mystique of the dynasty itself, its purity. An imperial consort entered the palace young, often in her teens. She might come from a noble family, chosen for beauty, education, connections. But from the moment she passed through the gate of divine prowess, her old life ended. Visits home were extraordinarily rare, if they happened at all. Contact with her birth family was strictly controlled, filtered through the eunuchs who managed all communication. Letters were read, gifts were inspected. Her identity was slowly absorbed by the institution. Irrevocably, she stopped being a daughter of a specific family. She became a possession of the imperial house. For the emperor's own daughters, the princesses, the rule was even more profound. An unmarried princess typically stayed inside the palace her entire life. She was a symbol of the dynasty's grace, too precious, too sacred to be exposed to the common world outside. Her existence was immense privilege and profound limitation. She lived in beautifully appointed apartments, surrounded by servants, wanting for nothing material. Yet her horizon was the roofline of the inner palaces. Her experiences were the changing seasons in the garden, the shifting alliances among the consorts, the distant sound of ceremonies from the outer courts. Her entire universe was this intricate, artificial society. It created a peculiar isolation. These women were at the very center of power, yet they had no power to shape their own destinies. A consort's purpose was defined by the hierarchy: to bear a son, to rise in rank, to secure her family's favor. A princess's purpose was to embody imperial virtue, a living ornament. Their world, for all its silks and jewels, was a landscape of intricate rules and whispered politics. With no external outlet, all their intelligence, ambition, emotion turned inward. The inner court became a hothouse. A glance could be a threat, a poem could be a weapon, a friendship could be a strategic alliance. Their lives were consumed by the micro-politics of the harem because there was no other arena in which to exist. The rule of seclusion served the state perfectly. It prevented outside influence from creeping in through the women's quarters. It kept the imperial bloodline contained, controlled. It presented an image to the world of an untouchable celestial family living in a realm apart. But the human cost was a life of luxurious confinement. They lived in a gilded cage. Every detail was perfect except the one that mattered most: the freedom to leave. They were surrounded by thousands, yet trapped in a profound solitude. There lives a silent testament to the price of dynasty. And in that sealed environment, where reality was carefully managed, how did anyone know what was true about the world, or even about themselves? Knowledge was a guarded resource. The 13th rule governed the mind. In the Forbidden City, education wasn't about enlightenment. It was a tool of statecraft. It was calibrated to your station. For the emperor, his schooling was his first duty. From childhood, his days were structured around lessons. He studied with the empire's most esteemed scholars. These men were more than tutors. They were architects. They shaped the consciousness of the future son of heaven. The curriculum was fixed, unchanging for centuries. The Confucian classics were the core: texts on morality, governance, the proper relationships between ruler and subject. He memorized histories of past dynasties, not as stories but as manuals. Manuals on what brought success and what caused collapse. He practiced calligraphy until his brushstrokes were perfect. Elegant writing was seen as a reflection of a virtuous mind. Every lesson reinforced a single idea: that his authority was rooted in wisdom and tradition. That to rule well was to embody the principles of the sage kings of old. His education built the ideological cage he would later inhabit. It taught him how to think and what not to question. For his sons, the prince's education was a different kind of discipline. It was a competition. Their tutors drilled them in the same classics, the same histories, but their performance was watched, closely watched by court factions. A prince who showed scholarly aptitude or military insight could become a favorite. He could attract supporters. This made the schoolroom a political arena. A prince's intellect was not his own. It was a weapon or a liability in the silent war of succession. Learning was stripped of curiosity. It became a performance for power. A misstep in a lesson could be seen as a lack of discipline. It could harm his prospects. The system turned brother against brother long before any open conflict. It ensured the pursuit of knowledge was fraught with danger. It bound the mind to the machinery of dynastic politics. This control filtered all the way down. Eunuchs and high-ranking servants received training, but it was strictly functional. A eunuch for the accounting office learned numbers and ledgers. One for the library learned cataloging, careful handling of scrolls. Their education was a set of specific skills for a specific duty. Broader literacy, the ability to read and write freely, was actively discouraged among the lower ranks. The state feared the spread of unofficial ideas. A poem, a rumor. A critical thought written down and passed hand to hand. In a sealed environment, independent thought was a contagion. By limiting access to the written word, the rules sought to prevent it. It kept the lower orders useful, but intellectually dependent. Their world was defined by oral instruction and routine, not by books or debate. This regulation of intellect had one goal: to ensure all knowledge served the existing ideology. It shaped every mind within the walls to uphold the structure that confined them. The emperor learned he was the center of a cosmic order. The princes learned their worth was measured against the throne. The servants learned their place was to serve without question. Education became a form of social cement. It hardened the hierarchy into the consciousness of each generation. It made the world of the Forbidden City seem not just powerful but right, natural, inevitable. When you are taught from your first memory that the wall around you is the edge of the universe, you stop dreaming of what might lie beyond it. The rule of the mind was perhaps the most insidious of all. It didn't just command behavior. It sought to design the very thoughts that made behavior possible. And if thoughts could be policed so completely, what then of the spirit, of the unseen beliefs that might offer solace within those silent walls? Fear was the 14th rule. It was the final enforcer, and it lived in the quiet spaces between all the others. There was a specialized judiciary for the palace, for those inside the vermilion walls. This court worked on a simple principle. The emperor's household was a sacred realm. Any offense against its order was an offense against heaven itself. Justice here wasn't slow. It wasn't public. It wasn't deliberative. It was swift. It was severe. And it was often secret. A word whispered in a corridor could be a formal accusation by sundown. The system was designed for one outcome: to make the cost of disobedience catastrophically clear. The punishments formed a ladder, a steep ladder of consequence. A minor breach of etiquette, a misplaced ornament, a poorly timed remark that might bring demotion. A reduction in your official stipend, which meant less for your household, less for your family outside. It was a financial wound, a social wound. A more serious transgression, like spreading rumors or showing disrespect, could lead to corporal punishment. The intent wasn't just physical hardship, it was public humiliation. To break the spirit, and to serve as a warning to everyone who saw it. For the gravest crimes, theft from the treasury, conspiracy, any hint of treason, the consequences were absolute. Lengthy imprisonment in the palace's own detention quarters, a form of living erasure or worse. The ultimate penalty was a shadow that fell across entire families. Collective responsibility meant an individual's crime could extend to parents, to siblings, even to children. A single act of defiance could doom a whole lineage. This wasn't just about punishing the person. It was about extinguishing the root of the rebellion. This created a climate of profound, meticulous fear. It was the engine that made the other rules work. The slow walk, the silent speech, the precise bow, these weren't just habits of courtly grace. They were survival techniques, honed by the knowledge that a single misstep could unravel everything. The beautiful corridors, the serene gardens, they were by this unspoken tension. A servant polishing a eunuch delivering a message, a consort choosing her words. All performing a continuous, silent calculation of risk. The palace justice system turned anxiety into a permanent condition. It made the rules feel less like guidelines and more like the architecture of reality. To question them was to risk your position, your identity, your family's future, your very place in the world. This system reveals the core paradox. The pursuit of perfect order required the constant threat of perfect chaos. The exquisite harmony of the rituals, the breathtaking visual order, it all rested on a foundation of controlled terror. It asked a brutal question of every soul inside the walls. How much of your own humanity are you willing to surrender for the privilege of remaining inside the gilded cage? And in that atmosphere, where trust was a liability and every ally a potential informant, where could a person find a moment of peace, or a fragment of genuine connection? The 15th rule was about these invisible lines. Lines that didn't just govern what you did, but what you meant to do. It all came from this ancient view of the world, where the palace was a kind of living diagram of the universe. So every choice, whether it was a huge building plan or just how you moved through a day, got weighed against a whole system of forces. What was lucky, what was unlucky? And this wasn't just superstition. It was a binding philosophy. It made existing into a kind of continuous ritual, connecting everyone inside to a cosmic order, something much bigger than themselves. The most basic part of this was direction. The whole Forbidden City was laid out on a north-south line, but this was deeply symbolic. The main gates, the throne, the most important halls, they all faced south. In that cosmology, south was the direction of warmth, of light and life, tied to the sun, to that vibrant yang energy. To face south was to embrace prosperity, celestial favor. The emperor, as the son of heaven, he literally sat facing that auspicious direction. aligning himself, his rule, with the forces of harmony. And the north, that was the opposite, the realm of cold, darkness, the more passive yin energy. So service quarters, storage, less important structures, they were often placed in the northern sections. This hierarchy was so ingrained that even inside a room, positioning mattered. An official would never knowingly put his seat to face north during an audience. That would symbolically align him with the inauspicious. Then there was the tyranny of numbers. The number 9 held supreme power. It was the largest single-digit number, a symbol of the emperor's ultimate complete authority, and you'd find it everywhere once you knew to look. The Meridian Gate has 9 rows of 9 golden door studs, those mythical creatures on the roof ridges of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. They number 10, but 9 is the crucial imperial count. The 10th is a unique figure. Even the steps on certain staircases were built in multiples of 9. This numerical rule was like a silent, repetitive chant of imperial supremacy, woven right into the fabric of the place. But these cosmic rules went beyond architecture. They reached into human interaction. There were social taboos so severe they carried the weight of law. To point a finger directly at the emperor was an unconscionable breach. It was seen as directing negative energy toward his sacred person. So instead, a subject would gesture with an open hand, or indicate direction with just a subtle nod, and the subject of death was strictly forbidden in the emperor's presence. Discussing illness, loss, mortality, that was considered to attract those very inauspicious forces into the space around the throne. Even words about passing were replaced with elaborate euphemisms. That created a strange, pressurized optimism in the inner court. A force that decay, that ending, didn't exist within the universe the palace had built. The effect of all these taboos was profound. It meant there was no neutral ground, no casual action. Picking a route through a courtyard, choosing where to stand in a room, even how you gestured in conversation, all of it was a potential spiritual negotiation. A misstep could be more than a social error. It could be a cosmic one, risking the displeasure of heaven, the harmony of the state. This framework bound everyone inside to a prescribed way of being more completely than any written law. It asked them to internalize a map of invisible forces, and to navigate it with every breath. It turned the palace from a residence into a sacred precinct, where every moment was a careful step in a lifelong silent ritual. And in a world so preoccupied with attracting good fortune, averting unseen harm, where could the mind ever rest from its own constant vigilance? Words were controlled in the Forbidden City. The 16th rule controlled information. It made every written thing, every spoken message, a possible state secret. It built a bureaucracy to manage truth, to filter reality before it reached the emperor's eyes or left the palace. At the center were the memorials, official reports from ministers, governors, generals. They weren't personal letters. They had a rigid stylized format. A specific vocabulary was required. The paper, the ink, the direction of the brushstrokes all followed ancient precedent. This wasn't just tradition, it was control. The formal style forced the writer into a posture of deference. It framed every piece of news, a harvest report or a military setback, in the language of ritual submission. A crisis had to be reported, but the wording had to affirm the emperor's wisdom. The cosmic order, the medium itself softened the message. Before any memorial reached the throne, it passed through many hands. Eunuch scribes in a dedicated office would receive it, log it, prepare clean copies. Censors reviewed the content not just for seditious ideas but for any breach of the form. An improperly formatted memorial could be sent back, or vanish into the archives, never seen. This gatekeeping was power. A eunuch in the documents office could delay a report, alter a transcription slightly, prioritize one minister's message over another. He didn't need to forge anything, he just needed to control the sequence, the timing, the presentation. Information was slowed, sorted, shaped, long before it became the official version. The rule extended outward too. Leaking any detail of life inside the Forbidden City was a capital offense. The mystique depended on secrecy, what the emperor ate, how he spent an afternoon, a disagreement between consorts. These weren't for outside gossip. Servants and eunuchs were reminded their eyes and ears belonged to the throne. A careless conversation at a palace gate could mean punishment. This sealed the inner court in a bubble. It allowed a curated narrative to be projected outside. One of perfect harmony, celestial favor, unwavering authority. This control had an effect. It meant the emperor, meant to rule millions, often saw the world through a constructed lens. The memorials presented a sanitized reality. The silence of the servants prevented unvarnished truths from leaking in. His advisors could collate reports, summarize them to tell a specific story, a story that justified their policies or discredited their rivals. The rule turned knowledge into currency. More than silver or silk, information was power. By monopolizing its flow, the palace bureaucracy didn't just administer an empire. It authored its reality. It built a world from paper and ink, where the most powerful man could be the least informed, surrounded by words, yet isolated from the truths they could have carried. In this system, what was written down wasn't a record of what happened. It was an argument for what should be believed. And if the truth could be managed so completely, what did that mean for the people whose lives were recorded or erased by those silent scribes in their quiet rooms? The most dangerous rule was the one about the future. The 17th rule. It was about the moment the emperor died. That transition of power, it was the empire's greatest weakness. You had stories of brothers fighting in the palaces, ministers backing different princes in civil wars. So the Qing dynasty created a system to try and control that chaos. It was a secret locked in a box, behind a plaque, in the most important room in the Forbidden City. They called it the Secret Edict. While the emperor was alive, he would decide privately. He'd write his heir's name on imperial paper, then seal it inside this small, ornate box, and the box wasn't hidden away. It was placed somewhere with supreme symbolic weight, behind the central plaque in the Palace of Heavenly Purity, right above the emperor's own throne. The plaque had 4 characters: Qing Gong, upright and luminous. The secret of the future sat in the shadow of those words. The logic was clear: keep the choice secret until after the emperor's death. That way, you disarm the court. A prince who doesn't know he's the heir can't gather supporters. A prince who isn't the heir can't rebel against a decision that hasn't been announced. It was meant to freeze everything. Keep every prince in a state of hopeful obedience. Protect the sitting emperor from any challenge. But the human mind hates a vacuum, and the Forbidden City was built on reading signs. So even though the edict was physically secret, the court became a machine for interpreting hints. Which prince got more audiences? Which one received a meaningful gift? Which tutor was assigned to which young man? Every gesture from the aging emperor was scrutinized, analyzed, whispered about in the corridors. Factions still formed. They just formed in the dark, based on speculation, on rumor. Powerful ministers and eunuchs would quietly align themselves with a prince they believed had the best chance, investing in that future. Then the emperor dies, and that quiet speculation turns into a ritual. High officials, imperial guards, senior princes, they all gather in the Palace of Heavenly Purity. The box is retrieved from behind the plaque. The seals are broken, and only then for the first time is the will of heaven made known. The name is read aloud. The chosen prince, who might have spent decades in uncertainty, kneels and accepts the mandate. His rivals, their hopes gone in an instant, kneel beside him and pledge their loyalty. You see the limits of control here. It was a brilliant bureaucratic solution. It probably prevented some open wars of succession, but it couldn't eliminate ambition. It couldn't stop the silent intrigue that infected the court for years, for decades. While everyone waited, it just drove the competition underground, traded the threat of open conflict for a pervasive hidden tension. The system tried to impose order from beyond the grave, but it couldn't legislate away the hunger for power or the fear of being left behind. This rule acknowledged the empire's greatest fear, its own future, and tried to cage it in a box, behind a golden plaque, a final attempt to control the one event that controlled completely, death itself. And in the silence after the box was opened, a new emperor would rise. But what rules governed him then? Not the old ones, not the rules of a son. The immense, lonely protocols of the throne. The 18th rule made time into a performance. The imperial calendar wasn't about seasons or planting. It was a sacred schedule of rituals, each one a public restatement of the cosmic order. The year wasn't a cycle of months, it was a loop of ceremonies. And inside the Forbidden City, for everyone from the emperor down to the lowest servant, this was the real work of the state. Not governing, not in a modern sense, but performing, continuously performing the dynasty's legitimacy. Take the winter solstice, the longest night. For the emperor, this wasn't just an astronomical event. It was the most important ceremony of his reign. Before dawn, he'd lead a procession out of the city, through the silent streets to the Temple of Heaven. There, alone on the great marble altar, he would offer sacrifices to heaven, pray for forgiveness for any misrule, plead for continued favor. That was his core job, to be the sole intermediary between his people and the celestial forces. The entire ritual was scripted. The color of his robes, the number of steps, all of it timed to the second. A single misstep wasn't just an error, it was a cosmic risk, a sign that heaven's favor might be withdrawing. Then there were the New Year audiences, the first days of the lunar year. This was the empire's political theater. Officials from all over would gather in the vast courtyard before the Hall of Supreme Harmony, rank upon rank of them, in full ceremonial regalia. They'd perform the 3 kneelings and 9 prostrations in perfect unison, a sea of bodies moving as one in submission. The emperor, high on his throne, would receive their homage, accept their memorials. This spectacle wasn't about discussion or policy. It was about visualization. It made the abstract hierarchy physically real. Every official there was both an actor in the drama and an audience to his own place within it. Even an imperial birthday wasn't a personal celebration. It was a state festival, a ritual of longevity for the dynasty itself. There would be banquets, music, performances, tributes from vassal states, but the joy was formal, prescribed, another chapter in the narrative of celestial blessing. The consequence was a life of relentless rehearsal. Months could be spent preparing for a single ceremony. Musicians practiced the ancient tunes, guards drilled their formations, officials memorized their movements and prayers, eunuchs coordinated the logistics of robes and props and timing. For the emperor, his days were often blocked out for ritual practice, learning the cadence of a chant, the exact angle of a bow during a specific sacrifice. His personal time was consumed by the demands of his public performance. That left almost no room for the unscripted, a spontaneous trip, an informal gathering, a personal project. Those were luxuries the ritual calendar could not afford. Life became a series of looming ceremonial deadlines. The pressure was immense. To perform flawlessly was to prove the dynasty was in harmony with heaven. To falter was to invite doubt, to risk the suggestion that the mandate might be slipping away. So time inside the walls became a kind of beautiful prison, each season marked not by changing light, but by the next grand performance on the celestial stage. The individual, even the emperor, vanished into the role. The ritual was everything. It was the engine of the state and the cage for the soul. It asks a question. When your entire life is dedicated to performing an eternal, perfect order, what happens to the person you were before you put on the costume? Silver meant loyalty. That was the 19th rule. It was about survival, not a salary, a stipend system. Everyone, from the empress down to the lowest eunuch, they got a monthly allowance, a set amount. Silver taels, rice, silk, charcoal for winter. The amounts weren't random, they were numbers. A direct translation of your rank on the imperial register. A second-rank consort got this much silver, this much grain. A fifth-rank guard got less. Your entire material life was issued like a ration by the imperial household. This created total dependence. There were no shops inside the Forbidden City, no markets, no way to earn anything extra. If you needed more silk, you couldn't just buy it. You waited for a gift from above or a promotion. Your stipend was your whole world. It covered your food, your clothes, your housing, the needs of your servants, your family. To have it reduced was a catastrophe. Immediate hardship, less food, thinner robes in winter, a demotion you could feel in your body. So the rule did something. It made obedience and survival the same thing. Good behavior, staying in favor, it wasn't just about avoiding punishment. It was about securing your next month's rice, your winter fuel. A promotion meant more than honor. It meant a heavier purse, better silk, more meat. Loyalty became a practical calculation, an economic necessity. The idea of serving the emperor was woven right into daily need. This logic extended to gifts. A superior could give a bonus, extra silver, a bolt of fine fabric, a delicacy from the kitchens. These weren't just kindness. They were investments, tools of control. A gift created obligation. a gratitude that was meant to become future loyalty, useful service. It bound the receiver to the giver, a chain of dependency that mirrored the whole hierarchy. Even outside the walls, families relied on this. A daughter's high rank could mean a flow of imperial favor and resources to her entire clan. Her mistake could cut that lifeline. The result was no financial autonomy. You couldn't save to leave. You couldn't invest to build something separate. Your economic fate was locked to your position in the palace bureaucracy. Leaving rebellion, it wasn't just treason. It was economically unthinkable. Where would you go? How would you live? The walls were more than stone and tile. They were made of calculated dependency. This rule made the most rational choice, the only choice for survival, to play by the palace's rules, to internalize them, to make preserving the system the same as preserving yourself. In that world where your next meal depended on your rank, what space was left for a private thought? A disloyal dream? The system seemed airtight, a perfect machine governing bodies, minds, and pocketbooks. But even the most meticulous rules have a limit, a final frontier they can't conquer. The 20th rule is the one we write ourselves. It's the story we tell about the Forbidden City long after it opened. Today it's not forbidden, it's a museum. Millions of visitors walk that central axis every year. Their cameras flash where only the emperor once walked. The silence is gone. It's replaced by the murmur of tour groups. The yellow roofs are still there, but now they're a spectacle of heritage. Not a decree of divine right. The rules were lifted, but they didn't vanish. They linger in the stones, they wait to be read, and to understand them changes a visit. It becomes a journey through a landscape of power. That gate isn't just an entrance, it was a filter. It sorted the world by rank. That color isn't just pretty. It's a law, worn as glaze on a tile. That empty courtyard isn't just space. It was a theater, where thousands moved in orchestrated silence. The legacy of these rules is a shift in how you see. They teach you to see history not as events but as a system, a living system of control. The architecture becomes a text. Every choice becomes a sentence. The height of a stair, the bend of a roof, each one is part of a long argument about order, about authority. And that legacy echoes beyond the museum walls. Historians point out the patterns, the meticulous bureaucracy, the reverence for hierarchy, ritual fused with administration. These patterns shaped imperial governance for centuries. They seeped into the cultural bedrock, influencing attitudes toward structure, toward authority, attitudes that resonate even now. The Forbidden City is a case study, a universal one. It shows how absolute power sustains itself, not through dramatic tyranny, but through patient management, the relentless management of everyday life. It fused law with architecture, ritual with routine, economics with emotion. It built a world so complete, so internally logical, that to imagine an alternative felt like imagining a different cosmos. That's the final lesson, the haunting one. Grand history, the kind in textbooks about emperors and dynasties, that history often rests on a hidden framework, a framework of minute controls, demanding often invisible controls. They govern the angle of a bow, the timing of a meal, the thread count in a robe. For the people who lived within them, these rules weren't abstract. They were the texture of their lives, the price of their survival, the shape of their world. They remind us that power is often most potent when it's quiet, when it has learned to speak the language of walls, and rituals, and daily need. The Forbidden City stands now in peaceful silence, a treasure for all to see. But if you listen closely, in the space between the tourist footsteps, you can still hear it, the faint, enduring whisper of its 20,000 rules, a whisper about the cost. The beautiful, intricate, profoundly human cost of building a perfect world, the silent steps on the central axis, the flash of forbidden yellow. Each rule was a thread in a design, a grand design, and together they show you the Forbidden City. Not just as a palace, it was a masterpiece of social engineering, a place where breathtaking beauty and structured order were intertwined, each one upholding the other. These 20,000 regulations, they were far more than inconveniences. They were the essential gears, the hidden gears, the ones that kept the celestial machine of imperial power running smoothly, generation after generation. Without them, the mandate of heaven would have been just words. The rules turned a philosophical idea into a lived reality, a tangible reality for everyone inside the walls. They teach us about hierarchy, the extremes of hierarchy, how a society can function when every single person has a place, from the emperor to the maid, a place defined with absolute precision, communicated by the color of a roof tile, the pace of a walk, the portion of a meal. This system achieved a kind of perfect order, an eerie order, but it came at a price. The price was absolute security for the state, purchased with the personal freedom of the individual. The emperor in his yellow robes was as bound by ritual as the eunuch guarding his door. Both lived in a gilded cage. Its bars were made of protocol, yet within that rigid framework we also see the human capacity to adapt, to find spaces for agency, for subtle rebellion, for carving out a sliver of self within the overwhelming whole, the whispered alliances in the harem. The careful influence of a eunuch gatekeeper, the interpreted hint behind a secret edict, these were the ways life persisted. The system was designed for control, but it could never fully extinguish the dance, the intricate dance of human relationships, ambition, and survival that played out within its strict confines. As we step back from this glimpse behind the vermilion walls, a final question lingers. It's not about ancient China, it's about us. Consider the invisible rules that shape our own worlds today, the unspoken codes of our workplaces, the silent expectations in our communities, the digital architectures that guide our choices, that filter our realities. We may not bow in prescribed ceremonies, but we navigate systems of influence and constraint every day. The Forbidden City stands as a concentrated example, a powerful example of a universal truth, that power often operates most effectively not through force, but through the quiet, patient design of everyday life. It invites us to look closer at the structures we take for granted, to see the hidden rules written into our own modern landscapes.